All right, so this is going to be episode 3 of the Furry Art Podcast. I am joined today with my guest, Mikey. Thanks for coming on, Mikey.
Yeah, it's great that Anyway, yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. Mikey is could you explain what you do for the most part?
I mean, a little bit of everything. Mostly just, yeah, 2D freelance illustration, mostly not safe for work, not gonna deny. But also we are currently doing a little bit of game dev with my friends, hopefully releasing some form of working prototype by the end of this year. But yeah, mostly 2D illustration.
Nice, right on. So, there's a few things I wanted to ask you about. Where to start? So how did you? I know you do a lot of 2D illustration. You got the drawing thing going on. What was? Did you start with 2D or 3D first, and how did that kind of like branch together and overlap and stuff?
Uh, definitely 2D was the starting point for me. Like, I get that question a lot. Like, when did you start? How did you start? And it always, like, really confuses me because honestly, you can answer that question in so many different ways. In a sense that, like, you could say I started like when I was a toddler, right? Scribbling stuff or just with crayons on paper, and that would be a valid answer. Then I could say that like I kind of started drawing in an art school, like in I don't know when I was around 10 or something. But it was definitely not when I really developed passion for drawing, and that's not like when I joined furry fandom. That wouldn't happen until I was like around 17, 18. And but then you can ask when I started like considering drawing and illustration and art as a career. That wouldn't happen until like my late college years. And then again, I wouldn't say that I really started like drawing more or less professionally until I went to vocational school for 3D art. But that wouldn't happen until I was like, I think, like 24. So there are so many different answers I could give to this question, like art and you know, it's a constantly developing process.
Yeah.
But if I were to give an answer to this question, yeah, I would say like around 10 years ago is when I like really started, considering art as something that I want to do for the rest of my life.
Okay, so you've been at it for quite a while then. It's been yeah. So you said
Oh yeah, yeah.
you studied 3D art in college, was it? Or
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, like no, my actual college degree like has nothing to do with art really. It's I don't know if you've heard about it. It's Snowman School in Los Angeles. It's they do have a bachelor's degree now. When I went there, it was still only like a vocational school. I received certificate. But honestly, if I was like were to choose right now, I would still probably prefer their like 2 year course to get in like an actual bachelor's degree there. Yeah, it's a great school. It's like extremely tough in terms of just academic schedule
yeah.
in a sense that they cram a lot of information in a very short period of time. But that's due to how they originally were established as a school for already like for established 2D professionals that want to learn 3D art and VFX.
Okay.
But Yeah. It was a great experience that like really helped me with developing my 3D skills.
Oh, nice. So what were you was it studying 3D character art, or was it just like general 3D or
Well, back then, I don't know the tracks that they have right now, but back then they had five different specializations, and only one of them was real-time graphics. So there wasn't like the, art for games was already specialization. So that's what I chose. I always was fascinated by video games and wanted to, consider it a career in video games. That's why I chose it.
okay. So it was
So I'm like more or less a generalist for real-time graphics.
okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Cause yeah, I was looking at your Twitter earlier, just before we came on here, and I was seeing that you had like certain level design, like 3D setups for different levels in your game, and I noticed that a lot in your
Hmm.
work just in general. Like it's not just character art. There's like quite a bit that goes into your backgrounds and just like general world building and set design. So I can definitely see you describe yourself as a generalist. Just like every aspect of it seems to be very considered.
Yeah, more or less like jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah, because in a game that we are working on, yeah, pretty much I'm responsible for all aspects of art, and also like doing quite a bit of writing, and that kind of stuff. So and even a little bit of coding, even like even though like it's mostly just prototyping, nothing that will be in the final version. Still, sometimes I just choose to prototype stuff with Unreal blueprints by myself. So yeah, uh, indie game development is like that. You have to do basically, you have to be
Yeah,
ready to do everything by yourself. Yeah,
small
even
team.
if you have a team of friends. Yeah,
Yeah.
working with you.
All right, on. Can you say what the game like? Anything about what the game is about, or is it kind of like?
Absolutely,
Oh,
absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
the game, well, again, in terms of main gameplay loop, we have changed it dramatically because the original idea was, well, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It was basically meant to be like a Hades clone, but like furry. It's like we were like really fascinated with Hades when it came out, and but it's a great game. But the thing is, why we eventually changed the main gameplay loop is if you want to make a roguelike, you need your combat to be incredibly snappy. Like it needs to be incredibly polished. And eventually we just realized that like no matter how much we polish our like combat elements,
Yeah.
it's just never gonna be as crisp as what, Supergiant games do, or any other team with experience of making roguelikes, right? So we essentially decided that no, we kind of want to focus on stuff that we can do really well, which is like character designs and writing stories, and make gameplay itself not so dependent on polishing the combat and just general like game balance to a degree where like we yeah it's probably would be like a huge skill issue for us to create something like that. So currently it's the main gameplay loop is more of a classical RPG, even though like we're still keeping um, real-time combat in our game. It's not gonna be a focus anymore. It's gonna be more of a supporting game mechanic. Right now, it has a lot of similarities with games like original Fallout 1 and 2, except for turn-based combat. And surprisingly, another game that comes to mind is Banner Saga. Even though the setting is extremely different, it's still the idea of traveling with sort of like a caravan of companions that you pick along the way is very similar.
Okay.
So that's where we at right now.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that sounds like it's gonna be a cool project when it comes out. Yeah, I, I must admit I'm not like super well versed in the in video games just in general, so
Hmm.
not 100% sure.
So sorry. Yeah, I used. I always like when I give pitch elevators. I always try to use other games as an
Yeah,
example because it's like it's just much quicker to say. Yeah, it's kind of like a little bit like Fallout 1 or 2. But yeah, okay. If I explain it without giving direct references to other games, essentially main gameplay loop is you have a caravan. It's a trading caravan, so the big part of the game is actually like trading management simulator. And you travel from town to town, solving the main plot mystery, but along the way you pick companions that are, well, I'm gonna deny it, they're all like thirst baits. They are all like romanceable, hot as hell characters. Like our game is not safe for work, but like I'm not gonna deny that it's low key horny. Um, but it's yeah.
yeah,
Again, not a porn game, but yeah, a lot of really really unreasonably hot characters. And yeah, three main aspects of the game. It's like traveling from place to place, trading, solving the main plot mystery, and also like gathering a big team of companions that are, yeah. You could call that aspect of the game like kind of like a visual novel, but not quite. It's more of a, you have companions that have their own stories that you can choose to delve into or just completely ignore. That's the general idea.
okay. Man, that sounds like a that's quite the scope. It's gonna be a big project.
Um, Actually, we're cutting a lot of the stuff out that you kind of would expect in these games. We're trying to be reasonable about our scope.
Yeah,
Scope creep is inevitable, but in this sense, like for example, there is no open world in our game. The game is basically a bunch of little pocket universes. Like in every town, you will have just several locations where you can go to. So other visual aspects will have to carry the feeling of the scope of the world. Um, the combat is going to be quite rudimentary compared to what you can find in other RPGs. We don't plan on any like significant level ups, any like form of progression. So combat is going to be more or less of a supporting mechanic.
yeah.
So yeah, we are trying to be reasonable about the mechanics that we are adding to our game. Uh, Sometimes we're not, but we're trying to.
Oh, right on. Yeah, I could definitely imagine it being a constant battle to keep it reasonable.
It's yeah, every time. Every time somebody comes up with a really good idea, it's painful to go like, yeah, it sounds good, but we're probably not edit that.
We're gonna spend another month working on this. Like, oh,
Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, um, maybe the visual style that I initially chose for the game is a little bit too detailed, even though I try to cut as many corners as I could. It's still quite high visual fidelity for a project of for a team of our size for and what we can do as people who don't even work full time on it.
Yeah, yeah. I was seeing some of
Um,
the character models that you had, like not the finished versions, just like whips that you posted on Twitter, and I was like, man, these are pretty detailed. These are,
yeah.
yeah, you're really
Um,
going all out on them.
it's again it's like also a visual style that I initially chose for the project, which is there is a lot of essentially the main kind of influence is late medieval Renaissance up to like 17th century. Um, um, Middle East, North Africa, Ottoman Empire, that region, and it includes a lot of decorative elements. I was always fascinated with that area and that period because of extremely intricate um, decorativism
Yeah, it was a little
in
decorative.
art. Yeah, in art and styles. Um, but at the same time, nailing it and incorporating it into your style just takes quite a bit of time because it's back then it was like artisanal work. Like people would spend lifetimes honing that art, right? And here, of course, like we have a lot of modern tools that automate the process. I don't have to, weave a very intricate brocade for like half a month, but I can do it in a matter of seconds. But at the same time, the scope, right? I
Yeah,
need to create like dozens of characters that are like very um, fancily dressed. Um, so yeah, it was maybe a bit of a mistake initially, but I'm still sticking to it. It's just a cool um cool era and particular styles to draw inspiration from.
yeah. Because I saw in your uh, an example, like you just like of the tiles that you made for one of the textures in the game. Those like very intricate
Oh yeah.
geometric patterns, and I was like, wow, that must have
Hmm.
so much work just for like that little bit of a decorative element when it comes to like medieval
Hmm.
Turkish architecture
Uh,
and stuff.
it's yeah. The art still survives in Morocco, and I don't remember the exact name. There is a specific name for that particular style of ceramic tiles. It's really cool. I watched a ton of videos. The most fascinating one to me was probably when they invited a team of craftsmen from, I think it was from Fez, to recreate a traditional Moroccan courtyard in Metropolitan Museum. It was extremely informative, actually, and but yeah, that one was created in Substance Designer, and Substance Designer is basically just plugging nodes into each other until it looks good. Actually, kind of like my little guilty pleasure. It's kind of like a tedious, meticulous process, but making materials in Substance Designer is yeah it my weird definition of fun.
It is fun to fiddle around with materials, get way too
Hmm.
in depth into it, have a bunch of like custom little parameters and stuff to just tweak it exactly the way you want.
Hmm. Oh yeah. When you like create a material with like when you can just slide one parameter and it like changes the final output drastically, that's the orgasmic feeling in the end that wow, you created something not only like really pretty but also interactive.
Yeah, and then you can generate a
which
ton of
allows you
like
to,
variations really quickly with it too. So it's like you don't have to
yeah,
just start from
small
scratch every
variations.
time.
Yeah. Actually, Adobe introduced like smaller version of Substance Designer, which is called Substance Sampler, which is basically like a quick version. You don't have to meticulously set up nodes in it. You basically like slide several parameters, and you can pump out very simple materials. Not even simple materials. Like you can make quite sophisticated materials with like simple parameters. It's really helpful for when you need like 17 variations of wood planks in your project. Which really helps. Like I, you know what artists generally think about Adobe, and I'm exactly on the same side. But
Yeah.
yeah, the
Have
projects that they bought, which is Substance Designer, Substance Painter, they didn't manage to screw them up just yet. Those are really good.
Yeah, no, I haven't tried Substance Designer, but I've seen a lot of what people can do with it. It's pretty remarkable. Like, I was wondering, like, for example, when it comes to like textiles and like little patterns on fabrics and stuff, like, is that all? What does that process entail exactly? Do you like start with a 2D drawing of the texture and then just change it up in
Mm.
Substance Designer, or you just start purely from Substance Designer?
I think the easiest way would be to show how this process looks, and that's probably the moment where I'm like, yeah, this is where I really want to screen share a little bit. Um, and let me find something from the project. Maybe actually, you know what? The tiles that you mentioned, I can show the graph to you,
Oh,
how it
okay.
looks. Okay, so this is a like relatively simple graph. Honestly, geometric shapes in Substance Designer are actually much simpler than organic shapes, to my mind. Like I spend so much more time doing like tileable cliffs or just organic shapes of any form or kind than something like this because all of these nodes they are very simple. You basically take some form of very simple shape and then you start transforming it. So like pushing, rotating, adding other shapes. After that, like you just like make a circular shape out of it. Then like further editing it. So for example, the main like circular shape is basically like you take a little angle thingy and then you like rotate it until it actually kind of looks good.
Oh my god, that's
So
so cool.
in the end, making yeah,
Wow.
making like the geometric shapes is really that big of a deal because it's just like this is the shape that is like just rotated how many times? 16 times. And voila, you basically have a shape that you can after tile after that, and there it is. Um, After which, so basically this here node is like the one that does all the heavy lifting. There is a very helpful node that is called flood fill. That what it essentially does, it like recognizes the uh, patches. You see, like there are here these are white and flood fill essentially just recognizes every little tile as its own separate element.
Okay.
After which you can start randomizing. So for example, here is just colors with just a little bit of randomization, right? but like for example, all the teal tiles are pretty much of the same color. But after that, you can take and add a little bit of a color variation. After which it like becomes way more varied and
Oh
looking more
yeah,
natural because yeah, because natural tile glazing isn't perfect.
yeah. Each one's
Um,
like made by hand. They're all gonna be slightly
yeah,
different.
yeah, just slight variation. Yep, after which you add a little bit of a, okay, where is it? Here, yeah, for example, here, this is the height map, which represents that all tiles are not exactly, they are not exactly fully flat. All of them are just a little bit of, they have a little bit of a tilt. Um, and in the end, let me try to show the specular. Yeah, in
Oh
like a
yeah,
specular reflection, you kind of can see that every tile reflects light under just slightly a bit of a different angle, which gives it like a more natural feel.
yeah. It takes
Um,
away a lot
so
of that computer perfection and just makes it just quite a bit more believable. That is amazing.
yeah. It's always all about this like very intricate balance between order and chaos. Even like if it's a man-made um, man-made structure, man-made material like tiles, they're still in like incredibly like all of this little imperfection is what makes it like differ from computer generated. Um, Speaking of cutting corners, for example, in this material, all the white tiles that separate the color tiles, they are supposed to be like little separate tiles of like much simpler shapes. But in this case, it's more or less like just one big white shape.
It's kind of like the grout between the tiles.
Um, and but the problem, like, if I wanted to make it more natural and more realistic, I would have to go and like painstakingly uh, separate them by hand because I didn't come up with an automatic solution for that, and that would include a lot of manual labor. Uh, and but yeah, like but at the same time, it wouldn't elevate the material to a degree where like most people wouldn't notice it, right? Most people wouldn't know that like all of these like white tiles are not separated and just are one big shape. So this is, for example, a place where I was like, yeah, here like I'm not spending another like a whole day trying to figure out automatic solution for it or just
Yeah.
doing it by hand. Like no, I'm not doing it.
There just comes a point where you can't quite. You gotta
So
cut it off
yeah,
at some
yeah,
point.
this is the example where I had to. Yeah, it's just, diminishing returns. This material is gonna be in a top-down isometric view game, so it's gonna be basically on the screen is gonna be seen like that. Would you be able to tell that like the white part is not separated into small tiles? No, not really. Almost nobody would, except for people who are gonna watch this podcast and know that I cut corners here. So yeah, here is the general process of you work in Substance Designer. It's all node based. You first create a basic shape from which you work, and then from that shape you start pulling information to add roughness map, to add normal map, height map, albedo, metalness if you need it. I could maybe try to find um, something organic to show a little bit of a difference between like
Yeah, I'd love to see
man-made
that.
structures and are organic. Okay, there we are. Um, it's a really simple, more stylized material, but at the same time, mm, fundamentally the process is basically the same. It just um, includes way more warping and way more scattering randomly. You can see a lot of like pebbles and just like weird little imperfections in the sand. So basically, like a lot of warp nodes, um, and yeah, and then like scattering little pebble thingies to make it more organic. Um, this is not the best example of organic material just because it's very stylized, but sadly, I don't think I will find anything more interesting right now.
Oh, that's okay. It's
So yeah.
still really neat to just see that these are all like entirely just procedurally generated. Like especially with those tiles. Like if I were to do that, I would have been spending a bunch of time just drawing those out and then trying to extract different maps just from the 2D drawing. I just yeah, I find it
Hmm.
so fascinating that you can just
Yeah,
procedurally
like
generate
when
to
you
that
draw,
extent with this program.
yeah, when you draw it by hand, it's like it takes so much time, and in the end, you only have one variation. Where here, for example, I want to change the like the shape of the circle, right? For example, I don't like the position of the star, then I will go and I will add like transformation node here, and all I have to do is basically go like whoop, and now it's like changed. Well, it's not looking that good anymore, but like yeah, the idea is that I like go in and I can very, very quickly change.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of like a very, very pretty interactive kaleidoscope. Um, but yeah, you can adjust and change the material in a matter of seconds. That's why like procedural materials have basically taken over the industry.
Yeah, and then I
It's
guess
it's
if you
all either like
sorry,
yeah,
go.
sorry. Oh, it's just all either procedural materials or photogrammetry or combination of thereof.
So once you finish this texture, would you just like bake it into a series of maps, and then you can just stick it into whatever
Yep.
program you need?
Once basically here are the outputs. Like this is the diffuse map, base color map, roughness map. This is the backed map. The way Unreal Engine handles it, like roughness, ambient occlusion, metalness, height map. This is the normal map, and basically you use all of these three in the engine, and it basically gives you the same result that it shows here. There is actually a plugin for Unreal Engine that allows you to directly transfer Substance Designer materials into the engine without having to bake them into maps. It does that automatically, which I mean it speeds up process, but I never found much use for it. It's not that hard to bake maps at our level. Probably for professional AAA studio environment artists, that's like a huge help when they need to adjust stuff interactively.
Yeah, going through like
And
100 revisions, just constantly
basically,
tweaking little
yeah,
things.
that yeah, it probably really helps them, but yeah, on our level, yeah, it's not necessary.
Wow, well that is really neat. Thank you for showing me that. That was I was wondering about
Yeah, of
those
course.
tiles, and yeah, it's so cool to see that.
So yeah, this is basically the process of creating um 2D materials for our game.
So one of the other things I wanted to ask you about was your approach to learning anatomy. Because I was looking through and like you
Mm.
seem to have like a well, not seem to have you just have like a really great grasp on anatomy, and I was wondering what was the process that like you went through to learn it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I would say references, references, and references again, but that would not be the full picture, right? I do have a huge library of mm, photos of just like every like body part under every possible angle because um like with like every little sketch that I start. Like first thing I do is go back to my reference folder and try to find the most fitting picture. Um, but at the same time, there are a lot of important resources that I use in the process that were extremely helpful to the process of like, specifically learning anatomy, which would be, of course, you've probably heard about it and used it yourself, Anatomy for Sculptors. Amazing assortment of resources that are very well organized, very um, just very helpful charts. Probably the most accessible, the most comprehensible charts that you can find online. The second resource that was of great help and I used a lot, especially way back when I only started drawing, is Sarah Simblet's book. I think it's called Anatomy for the Artist, which is essentially the way it's organized. There are photos of models with kind of like a transparent
movie
drawings.
sheets.
Yeah,
Yeah, I do have that book.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's great. It's
It
amazing.
really is. It's got a ton of good
That
references in it.
Yep, yep. It was like really helpful at the start. Then another one, very useful one, is there is an interactive crochet by the same guy who does Anatomy for Sculptors online. I can send you the link later.
Yeah, absolutely.
It, yep, it's also like very, very helpful. Um, and another tool that I cannot recommend enough is do you know they go by the name PNGX on Twitter?
PNGX. No, I don't think I'm familiar.
Correct me. Yeah, oh, correct me if I'm wrong. I think they are Chinese artists. And they do their own very, very useful tools. And the thing is, they just share them publicly. It's and those are the tools that I basically use on a like daily basis during when I draw. They are essentially AI assisted post search tools. It's incredibly helpful. And the thing
Oh.
is, they have like AI assisted post search for just stock photos. They have AI assisted tools for animal anatomy. So you choose only heads. So like really not that helpful for like just animal anatomy in general. But like when you need to search for a head, which is the case with anthro
Yeah, when
furry
you're doing
art.
further art, that's the main one you're worried
It's
about.
a very helpful tool. Yep, yeah, exactly. And they also have kind of like there is a site that is called right, it's called Human Anatomy for Artists. It's a like a big archive of just artistic photos of models, and they have a like a kind of like an unofficial plugin for their site that is exactly the same. You choose a pose with like a little skeleton dummy, and it basically gives you links to all the photos that they have in their library. You still have to buy them if you need high resolution.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Oh,
um,
wow.
needless to say that this little unofficial plugin probably made me spend more money on that site, like yeah, than I planned. Um, so yeah, references, anatomy materials that you can find available online. Sometimes you have to purchase particular references that you need. That's
Yeah.
kind of the basically the part of artistic process, I guess. Um, that's my approach to anatomy, and after that, yeah, it's just practice, honestly. Um, I kind of grew out of the idea of telling young artists just practice because it's not just practice.
Yeah,
You need
it's
to know certain,
complicated.
yeah, it's way more complicated than just practice. Yeah. When you say a young artist to just practice is basically you telling them to fuck off. Um, you yeah. So yeah, this is my approach.
Okay.
References, practice, to, like a specific set of materials that is really helpful in this process.
Did you ever do like a study on the level of like taking each muscle and learning the insertion and the origin and every single bone and stuff, or is it mostly just sort of the surface level forms
Hmm.
through
Well,
reference?
lately I've kind of realized that well, not lately, I would say it was like my kind of revelation maybe 5, 6 years into my drawing career that um, surface shapes are way more important than the specifics of anatomy. Like, until you get all of your apexes, all of your main forms and main shapes right, the knowledge of where biceps connects to your elbow doesn't really help you that much, right? So in that sense, it was again like big part for me of growing as an artist, understanding just how important stylization is. I was the kind of like young, naive artist that thought that if they learn anatomy perfectly, they will become a great artist, which is not the case. You
Yeah.
will become great at knowing anatomy. That's about it. Yeah, like gesture, stylization, shapes, um, like knowing where apexes are on the body. That is like fundamentally more important. It like comprises 80% of the knowledge of human body, and then like 20% is knowing like where pectoral connects to your shoulder bones, that kind of stuff.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I wasn't sure if it was like if it was. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. Because I've definitely been lately. I've been kind of going in the opposite direction of like learning just every single muscle individually and the names and the
Uh-huh.
origins and the insertions and every bones and doing crochets and stuff. But
And I'm not saying that like that won't help you. That absolutely will. But like you already have a great grasp on, general body shapes. And now you're basically at that like 10-15% of like polishing of your knowledge of human body, right?
yeah,
Whereas some beginner artists, unfortunately, I was kind of one of them, start their career and think that if they learn nitty-gritty of human anatomy, of like details, that will immediately make them elevate them as an artist.
oh yeah, definitely.
And
That's a trap you see a lot of people falling into,
yep,
where it's like they're
yep,
learning little
exactly.
anatomical details, and it's like there's basic figure drawing issues that need to be worked out first. You
Yep,
learn the
yep.
basic
You
proportions.
you see that they've learned the anatomy of a bicep like almost perfectly, but that like doesn't help the general picture because they don't know gesture.
Yeah,
They don't know general proportions.
so that kind of ties into speaking of gesture. Um,
Mhm.
I noticed you were like posting a lot of like whips on your Twitter where you do like many different little variations on a pose before committing to a final um, composition for your pieces. And I was wondering, like, Do you mostly do a lot of that variation and searching for the pose and composition with sketching, or do you like use 3D as part of that process in any way, like searching for different angles, just looking around in the viewport with the model or something, or do you mostly do that with sketching?
Wonderful question because when I got my first like 3D high, 3D euphoria, I was like, God damn, I can just like pose this dummy that I've created and then like find 5 million different angles. And one of them surely will be the one that I like. That is going to be absolutely perfect. And for a pretty long time, I basically just did that. I just would open Maya and start fiddling around with the pose and just like looking for the angle for field of view that I prefer, which in the end kind of started to feel incredibly stiff to me. Like that was my main issue with my own art. It was getting extremely stiff. That is kind of the problem with over relying on 3D in general. You can make amazingly detailed renders, right? But it will never have the fluidity of just traditional 2D drawing. So like about, I would say like 3 years ago, I started kind of like going back a little bit and starting to do little thumbnails in 2D. Because when you do little thumbnails, you start from the biggest shapes. You start from composition, you start from the motion, you start from the big shapes, the like the general mood of the piece. And then after that, I would go back into 3D and lay out my composition. And again, even though like I would make a composition, I would still try to use it as a more of a reference rather than a final polished 3D piece that I just want to touch up a little bit in 2D. I mean, I still
Oh, okay.
kind of like kind of do the almost like full 3D. For example, the Anubis piece that you mentioned is almost it's entirely 3D. Let's say it's entirely
Yeah.
3D. There is almost no 2D in it. It's just a render. But to me, it's just like became so much more important to be able to have like good gesture and good general shapes in art that like for example um if I could screen share a little bit more uh
Yeah, absolutely.
but by the way just in case you're posting your podcast to YouTube, is it fine to share not safe for work,
Um,
or would you prefer that I only limit myself to something safe for work?
you can just save for work. If I need to, I can just like edit things in
Okay,
a way that'll
okay.
be acceptable for YouTube.
Okay. That will be a lot of blurring. Then let me actually find something that is like something that looks like artistic nudity. Well,
I run
okay.
into this problem a lot as well.
I think this should be fine. Um, for example, this, right? I just like used basic dummies.
Hold on one second.
Um,
I can.
all right.
Okay.
So basically, I don't use this for anatomy. I don't use this for gesture or anything. This is almost entirely just for, this is used as a lighting reference, basically. I just want to see how colors interact with each other, and that's about it. This is the example of um, 3D piece that more or less is a reference. Speaking of that, Anubis piece.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, everything all right with the
Uh,
stream?
yeah, it's just every time you start and stop a screen share, I have to just like disconnect and reconnect from the call real quick, or else it won't show up.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is basically, a final piece. I just added a little bit um, to it into the that there is like a lot more texturing, a lot more, way more detailed sculpting.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, I can show the entire like process
Yeah, I'd love to see the
from
process.
yeah, from the first work in progress. Here, like I just like posed the dumb. I don't know, it's not. Yeah, this is the first. Should have taken more should have made more renders of like the initial layout. But yeah, like here is basically how I started by just posing a dummy, adding mass that represents water, just doing a few very, very simple tiles. These are not like Substance Designer or anything. I just like hand painted them.
Oh, okay.
It was much faster for this purpose. They don't need to be like, perfect video game quality.
Yeah.
Um, After that, a little bit of experimentation with water. Then just starting to add a little bit of simulation, a little bit more of texture work. Then I realized that this is a bit too patchy, so I just reverted back to simple like white tiles. Here's where I start sculpting. Just sculpting over the dummy, adding like detailed anatomy, more anatomy, like and a little bit of texture work. Here you can see like I changed lighting drastically to make it way more readable. More like detail work. Right now, like cloth looks a bit more like cloth looks a bit early 2000s graphics. And for example, like all of this copper is not properly textured. It's just like noises
Yeah.
that I plugged into the final material. But like nobody really cares, right? As long as it like fulfills the purpose of representing a very crude like copper, it serves the purpose. A little bit more.
There we go. Sorry.
Yeah, a little bit more like I've added dream lighting, just a little bit of it in simulation because I really try to nail the feel of like free flowing cloth. It's actually quite hard. Simulations are hard. Then more texture work, like changing details. After which I started like trying to nail the atmosphere, adding way too much atmospheric fog and particles, and then after that, like trying to tone it down. Like I want it, but I want just a little bit of it. So that was an interesting process. Changing lighting a little bit, changing noise on water. This is just adding a little bit of blue, like adding way too much bloom actually, then like toning it down. Oh, this I think is a final render without atmospheric effects. I've added like a fake, oh gosh, what's it called? Not an isotropic effect, caustics, water caustics.
Yeah.
And then trying to like blur them out a little bit, realizing that Blender doesn't have a blur node, having an existential crisis.
Oh, so this is in Blender, this one.
Yeah, this is all Blender. I've switched to Blender about a year ago because I kind of couldn't be bothered to pay for Maya anymore. Like I still vastly prefer Maya, but it's way too expensive. And actually, it was my first experiment with doing proper textures on high poly model, and I think it worked quite well. All of the like little droplets on his body.
Yeah, that was a
It's
detail
all
that I
textured.
noticed. Like, how did you achieve that effect? Did you just kind of like paint them on there, or is
Yep,
there...
they are basically. I used Substance Painter to kind of like generate flowing droplets, and had to do a lot of back and forth to make it look realistic. Um, but yeah, it's just normal maps and roughness maps. That's about it. Like my first idea, of course, was like actually simulating droplets, which was yeah, it didn't work.
Yeah, that'd be getting
So
involved.
yeah, I was like, yeah, the plan two is to actually um, paint them on, and it worked decently. Um, so yeah, and after that, I think it's basically just trying to tweak the atmospheric effects. Yeah, just adding a little bit of a vignette, and yeah, this is the final piece.
Oh, that's... Yeah, it turned out great. That's interesting that like I wasn't like for this process. I would have thought that you would have started with like a fully sculpted out model of Anubis and then pose the model. Whereas it seems
Oh
like...
no, yeah, yep.
So you
It's
started
it's
off with just
quite the
kind of
opposite.
a generic blank and then sculpted it in place.
Yep, yep. So yeah, there was a lot of back and forth and iterating in my workflow. Sometimes you just have to go back to the drawing board and try again.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to another thing. Like, roughly how long did that Anubis piece take? Because that's one thing that I've noticed. Like, you're pretty prolific. Like, you're just cranking out pieces one after another.
Good question. I think that was yeah, I was basically like working full time on that piece. I just wanted a break from commissions, wanted some personal peace. And I think it took like basically a full week, like full week without breaks. Just like 7 or 8 days of
Okay.
work. It's maybe I have a little bit of a problem like that, but I basically like my hobby is my main line of work, and that's why like if I'm obsessed with a piece, I just work like 7, 8 days in a row. I don't care. Um, but yeah, that's how it usually happens when like if you feel like I'm cranking out pieces like very fast, it means like I'm in my obsessive episode.
Just in the zone.
um yeah, yeah. Sometimes it just fuel just goes out completely, and I'm left completely, feeling completely powerless, and having to take a long break. But between those, yeah, I just sit down and work.
Okay. So you have like kind of a like periods of much more heightened activity and then kind of longer breaks in between rather than like just like a very like consistent or regular
Yeah.
kind of schedule.
Uh, yeah. I try to be way more consistent and way more, disciplined with my process. Like, taking regular breaks, but also like working regularly. But I gotta say that this is both a blessing and a curse of being a freelance artist. That you are essentially, yeah, like, process, artistic process basically like takes over your life, and your both your breaks and like your work is not regulated by anything. So like yeah, I can
Yeah.
often work for 2 weeks in a row without any breaks, and then like just fall down, like face first into the couch and like lay like
Yeah.
that for 2 weeks, for 2 days, for yeah.
uh, definitely
Um,
relate.
yeah,
Okay.
probably not very healthy.
It's tough, especially when inspiration strikes to be like, all right, I'm
Oh
just going to
yeah.
put in a reasonable amount of time on this. Let me just take the weekend off to just kind of chill, do something else. It's hard to switch away.
Yeah, yeah. But at the same time, that's when the best pieces come out, when you just like work for 20 days in a row, non-stop, and it's like the happiest time in your life because you're working on something like that you really, really like.
Yeah, and you just get so warmed up too. Like there's like a kind of level of especially drawing that just it takes doing a ton of drawing over a very short period of time and it just starts coming way more naturally.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I like I have to warm up, um, and do like, just warm up gesture drawings. Even like, for example, when I come back and feeling really stiff, like I've been doing 3D for several weeks, and now I need to come back to drawing. Basically, the first thing I start doing is basically scribbling. This is like my warm up. This is how I start. I just start scribbling. It doesn't matter. I'm not trying to draw anything. This is my like, warm up for my hand basically, right? I'm just drawing like eight shapes, then I start hatching to get used to it. After I'm like used to hatching, I just start drawing very, very random shapes. Like I don't care if it looks good, I don't care if it looks bad. Like this is like vaguely like human shaped, fine by me.
Yeah.
This is like my warm up process after a long period without drawing. And long period without drawing can be like, several weeks and can be 2 days. I totally understand what you're saying when what you mean by feeling very stiff and having to warm up.
Yeah, for me I generally try to like warm up with just like a bunch of figure drawings. There's a few that like
Oh yeah.
for the first day or two where they're just all complete throwaways, but yeah, definitely helps.
Just sketches that will never see the light of day.
Yeah. So you had a formal education in 3D stuff. Did you have any kind of like formal education in 2D and painting, or is that more of like a self-taught thing? Or
Unless you count just art school that I went to when I was like 10 to 14. No, I don't really have formal education in painting, basically. We had a few courses in gesture drawing, in sculpting, like traditional sculpting, at Noman, which was very helpful, but they were quite rudimentary. Like I cannot say that I haven't learned anything from them. I absolutely did. It was very, very helpful to, just general art education. But they were definitely no not the, proper academia stuff. It,
yeah,
it was it was very simple compared to what a lot of painters and sculptors do.
something you do at an atelier or something. Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
basically most of the stuff that I've learned about painting and gesture drawing, I learned by myself.
Do you have like any specific method when it comes to figure drawing? Like a certain school of thought? Like some people who they'll like do kind of a Loomis style. Some people do Riley, Bridgman. Is there like a specific thought process you have?
Yeah, well, that's you can like see the extent of my formal knowledge in the area because I've never heard those names before.
Oh,
So for me, gesture drawing is just capturing a shape, I guess. It's like way less about understanding the anatomy. I I will try to not Oh, I'm actually showing the my Clip Studio screen, so I don't have to worry about showing references. But let me open a reference on the side. Uh, all right, well, this guy, for example, sure. Um, yeah, I don't know. Uh, you see, I'm like even having a really hard time to explaining it in words because mostly I just start with like, you know, basic shapes. Just the important part for me in this part is like capturing relations between like limbs and main parts of the body. Yeah,
Okay, so you're doing some
uh,
like kind of comparative measurement kind of stuff.
I guess that's what it's called. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yep, that's where my narrative of an accomplished artist starts to crumble because this kind of stuff is just purely intuitive for me. So yeah, basically first gesture, second silhouette, then anatomy, I guess.
Okay.
And I still, even after all these years, constantly have to combat the urge to go into anatomy first. Like, I still have this problem where I'm like, really, really want to start like, fleshing out pectorals before I even have the main silhouette done, which hurts me in the long run, but
Yeah, it's just too tempting.
it just, yeah, it is. It is tempting to go into details before you got everything else done.
Especially when there's a
Like, I,
specific like bit, like a focal point in the that you know you want to have for this composition later on, and then just end up getting tunnel
mhm.
vision, spending way too much time on it, and then you realize, oh no, the whole thing's out of proportion. It starts falling
Yeah,
apart.
thank God for Liquify. I use Liquify a lot. And that's another point, like I heard it's said so many times by especially younger artists that are like, younger artists tend to be purists. Like, oh no, Liquify is such a bad, like you need to be able to nail everything from the start. If you use Liquify, you're cheating. Another pet peeve of mine. People using the word cheating in art. Unless you like directly freaking trace something, nothing is cheating. And even if you trace something for training purposes, go ahead. I don't think it's the best way to learn something, but like a lot of people use tracing as like unless you post it somewhere, right? Tracing is perfectly fine
Oh yeah, be a
to
way
to
of
my
kind of getting a
mind.
feel for proportions and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. You want to learn how like one artist or the other does something specifically. Yeah, trace their work for, training purposes. Don't post it without their permission. Don't usually I would say like general rule of thumb, don't post it at all. But like if you're posting it, just make sure you're asking them first and like absolutely making it clear that this is like a training piece that you're doing. So yeah, that's my TED talk on the matter of cheating in art.
Yeah. Now, when you do it professionally, you realize take every freaking shortcut you can. I don't have
Yep,
time for
yep.
purism.
Save your mental health. Take shortcuts. Except for AI. True AI.
AI a
AI
bridge
is
too
not art.
far.
It's it's not a shortcut, it's basically you don't participate in the process.
Yeah, it's just a
Don't lie to
completely different
yourself.
thing. I don't think I've ever actually tried the Liquify tool in Clip Studio. Didn't even know there was one.
Uh, honestly, it was one of biggest revelations for me when I switched from Photoshop, and it just was another like moment for me when I'm like, I'm not willing to pay Adobe for Photoshop anymore. It was when I accidentally updated to a newer version, and not only it was so much buggier than the previous version, they also broke tools that worked for decades. And one of them was actually Liquify tool. And then I switched to Clip Studio Paint, and not only like it is missing some functions that I used in Photoshop, but everything works perfectly smoothly. And Liquify is so much more organic in Clip Studio compared to Photoshop that I was
Isn't
like,
Photoshop kind of like a sort of grid kind of thing with the Liquify, or
no, it has a
maybe I'm thinking of
separate
something
window. You have
else?
to go into like a separate Liquify kind of like generator window. It's way less integrated into just the workflow in Photoshop. And it's been like that for, I don't know, ever since I started using Photoshop, so like nearly a decade. For nearly a decade, they did nothing to make their Liquify tool better.
Yeah, but I could definitely see how they'd be extremely useful, just nudging things around a little bit.
Yep, yep, it is extremely helpful. Like probably the biggest advantage over, traditional art. Just being able to come in and just fix stuff by pulling it in different directions.
That's another one of those things about blocking out compositions in 3D is that there is just so many different little parameters that you can adjust that it ends up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Again, I wouldn't like say that switching to 3D is panacea in a sense that like generally, I don't mean always and for every artist ever. Over relying on 3D makes your art stiffer. But that is why, like, again, like coming back to what we talked about before, I try to still stick to a lot of 2D parts of the process whenever I can, unless I just want like a really pretty, very static rendered piece, kind of like the Anubis piece, right?
Yeah.
It's a very static composition. It's a very symmetrical composition. It's a very static composition.
Kind
So
of
in that
sculptural in a way.
it's very like yeah, exactly, like Greek sculpture. I don't care about like motion and like very dynamic composition in it, so it's perfectly fine to have like a pretty like relatively stiff feeling from it. But in many cases, like yeah, this is not the thing 3D can help you with. Like this is the part where 3D will hinder your process, and it happens more often than a lot of 3D. Don't want to say worshippers, but people who think that 3D will solve all their problems for them don't realize.
That's interesting because they have like a lot of animators have a similar philosophy when they're animating puppets in Toon Boom. It's like you could just do all the key frames and breakdowns with the puppet, but they insist on doing like 2D, like actual drawings for all of their keys. So then that way, when they take the puppet, it's a lot more like fluid. Because these tools, yeah, they do tend to make things a lot stiffer.
Yeah, absolutely. Like 3D is just, it shouldn't be seen as just straight up upgrade over 2D. Those are fundamentally different tools that both of which have their own advantages and disadvantages. Like we talked before about materials, right? That are not procedural. You can paint those like intricate tiles by hand in 2D. You will paint exactly one type that you won't be able to change in a matter of seconds. This will take way more time. So just like in that case, procedural 3D is just the way to go, right? Whereas in many times, yeah, during my time being an artist, I was like, no, this is not a tool for 3D.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of like a whatever's just smoother, which is an advantage when you have that when you're doing that like 2D 3D hybrid is you can just kind of pick and choose like, oh, achieving this kind of like lighting effect would just be easier to just paint it instead of trying to fuss around forever in 3D to get it to work. You just do whatever's faster. But then when it's like you're blocking out a building, so much faster to just whip something up in 3D real quick instead of trying to like establish a grid and carefully plot out the placement of all these columns where it's like you could do it, but it's just a waste of time.
Exactly. Just learn to differentiate between like the fitting tool for a specific task. And that is like the skill that mostly comes with practice. This is the point where I'm like willing to say that that's mostly practice. I don't think this is the skill that can be taught reliably. Because the thing about teaching this sort of skill is, like, you can tell an artist to just, like a young artist to just trust you, like, and tell them this is where you wanna like work with 2D or you wanna work with 3D. They will not believe you. They want to do those mistakes by themselves. It's understandable. It's human nature. We are all very hubristic when we start new start learning new area of expertise in our lives, right?
You got a shiny new think tool and they think it's all powerful.
Yeah. Yep. And we think it's basically like panacea. It's basically it's gonna solve all your problems. It will not. Yeah, you just need to learn to incorporate it into your workflow.
Yeah, this has been super interesting. I kind of went into this thinking that you were working in 3D, like doing this hybridization in a slightly different way from how you're actually doing it. So this has been really interesting because I'm trying to like get more into 3D lately and like want to do a few pieces that are sort of a 2D 3D hybrid as well, and yeah, it's definitely gotten a lot of food for thought.
If you don't do 2D 3D hybridization, I gotta say you got a really good grasp on just lighting, because I honestly thought that you use quite a bit of 3D for your pieces.
Well, I do for some of them, but what I do is I'll like I'll do it for the backgrounds, like establishing like, things in perspective, unless it's like mountains or whatever, and then I'll just do it all in traditionally. But I'll do is like I have like these public domain, just like classical sculptures, and what I'll do is I'll just kind of stick it in the scene with the background, and then I'll like loosely sort of go, okay, this is kind of the lighting reference. This is sort of what it's meant to look like. And then I'll just like, when I'm painting the characters, I'm just kind of referencing it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense. Yeah. That's also a good idea. You're basically also incorporating 3D into 2D.
Yeah, I have a bit, like with the...
It's just traditional 3D.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's actually a good idea that I'd never really considered, probably, I guess, of using like classical sculptures for lighting reference, which in hindsight makes so much sense.
Yeah, it can be useful. I mean, I guess like, yeah, it can be. I don't know. I don't have any like 3D models of characters, like proper characters that I could use as a lighting model yet, but I'm slowly starting to build those up.
Well, I mean, having your own like, for example, like head dummies for different species, for like canines, felines, I don't know, equines. It kind of helps. At the same time, you don't have to. As I showed previously with like Anubis piece, you can just use very simple, like very simple human anatomy dummy, and that should be enough for for the first time. After that, it actually kind of sucks that I've had a whole library of different presets for different for different furry heads, and I will probably have to create it from scratch again, unfortunately. Um, it's not a big problem because they were old. Some of them were like 5 years old, which is I clearly have a better grasp on anatomy now that I've had like 5 years ago. So in many ways, I will benefit from it,
Yeah,
but
time for an
it's just
update.
it's just more work.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking like a few years ago because I kind of I scrolled a ways into your backlog on the Twitter, and I was seeing that you're
Uh-huh.
doing you're rigging up some character models where it's like, it wasn't just like a standard deformation when the arm bend. Like you actually like had this sort of like shape key or something where when the arm bend, you would actually see the bicep kind of like contract in a
Hmm.
naturalistic way.
I gotta admit, I'm not the best rigger. So yes, I was quite like happy with the SDKs, the set-driven keys that I've created for like biceps, and I think I also had some for pectorals. I'm not entirely sure. Um, but like almost during like 3 4 years ago when I was doing like extensive like 3D for my pieces, I would go in and sculpt over. Like I would pose it and then I sculpt over it, like because those deformation would still look quite unnatural.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
my pipeline included like posing my dummy, going to ZBrush, sculpting over to get the better anatomical details, going back to Maya to assemble the scene, go to Marmoset to light the scene and everything. I generally wouldn't texture anything. Those would be like very, very simple flat colors.
Yeah.
And then do the entire paint over workflow. So it was very labor intensive process. Um, Generally don't go that much into 3D for my pipeline 2D pieces anymore. It's just way too much work for very little effect. Um,
So yeah, now it's more like you use it just as a lighting and color ref kind of thing.
Essentially,
Huh.
yeah. And again, going back to I just felt like it would make my pieces a bit too stiff, a bit looking like sculptures.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, my workflow, even though it's generally stays the same in a sense that yeah, it's incorporating like a lot of 3D into my 2D painting. It changed a lot over the years.
So continue evolving process.
Absolutely. I mean, when you stop evolving your process,
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I you see
like
that a lot where
artists.
people just kind of like, especially in the fandom, they get like a really good style going and then just kind of stick with that exact same process. Whereas that's one thing I've noticed with your work. It's constantly evolving, constantly playing around with things, trying different things out, experimenting.
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting part of creative process, right? Experimenting, finding something new, trying something new. I absolutely I don't judge people who find the comfort style and they just want to stick to it and not change it ever. Like no judgment there. We all need to pay bills. But I honestly having a hard time. still like I have a developed process, right, for my pipeline for commissions. But still, I'm always trying to find some time to adjust and change it a little bit.
Yeah. Is there any things that you're like currently learning? Things that you want to experiment with in the future?
Well, I mean, currently I I'm still very new to Blender. Blender and Maya, I mean, they are fundamentally the same 3D software, but at the same time, there are so many bells and whistles that I've learned in Maya throughout. Well, I started learning in 2016, so like for at least 6 years I've been using Maya, right? So that like knowing all of those like shortcuts and like flick menus and everything, I don't have that skill in Blender anymore, right? So I'm way too stiff in I'm way stiffer in Blender. So like doing the same thing takes me 40-60% more time than it would in Maya. So currently that is a big like learning curve for me and just entirely new software in my workflow.
Yeah.
If we're talking about just like somehow adjusting my work process, uh, trying to think of something that is not like just learning new software. Well, I mean, probably the last thing like that was when I did that combined 2D, 3D animation. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the YCH, that was pretty.
Yeah, the YCH piece. It was, I mean, like, obviously, people paid a lot for that YCH. But it still like was extremely labor intensive. Honestly, mostly because I was learning new stuff. So if I were to, pipeline it, it would be way more efficient. But in that sense, like even for many people, it would probably feel like an outrageous price for YCH. It was basically cheaper than my regular commissions. Because I think I took like 20 full work days to complete that animation, if not more. Yeah, it was very labor intensive.
Yeah, because I had like a bunch of background characters and stuff. It was like.
Yeah. I even animated background.
Yeah, it was super in depth.
It was like I was like it looks empty. It needs life in the background. At the same time, they are animated on what's it called? Like animated on threes, in a sense that like it's I think that they are like 3 frames per second.
Yeah.
They are very, but like for background characters, it's more than enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, barely. It's definitely not where the eye is drawn in that piece for sure.
Yeah. But yeah. Enjoy that piece greatly. Maybe I will do something similar in the near future. I think I'm mentally prepared for another, and this time it's gonna be much faster. That was my most recent like process where I had to learn a lot of new stuff.
Did you have any experience with animation before that, or was that just like kind of diving right into it?
Again, in Neumann, we had a course on traditional animation. It was a very brief one and, like a side course. But I think I've learned. First of all, it was a really fun course. And I've learned a lot of basics. Our tests were starting from a very simple drawing, like a very simple bouncy ball, to doing basically like designing a character and making a walk cycle for them. It was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, was this like this was like on paper or was this?
Yeah, on paper. Well, what's it called? The light screen. The
light table, or...
Is it called light table?
I
Okay.
can't remember exactly what it is. I know what you're talking about because I
Yeah.
did study
Yeah,
animation as
exactly.
well. But yeah, eat your pegboard.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, all the like principles, like what's it called, the onion skin and everything. Like yeah, it was really fun. It was a short course and only taught basics because traditional animation wasn't the point of our education. But really, really good for fundamentals.
Yeah, yeah. Making an animation fluid on paper really
Oh
requires that you
yeah.
understand timing and spacing.
That's that is one of those like skills that you probably cannot learn by yourself without good guidance. I mean, you probably can. There are probably just young, like there is probably an 18-year-old on Twitter that does that after watching some tutorials better than all of us. But yeah, for most of us, that is a skill that is very hard to develop by yourself, I feel like.
Oh yeah, it takes a lot of critiques. Like,
A lot of back and forth and yeah, feedback from professionals.
yeah,
Still, animation is a lot of fun. A lot of work, but a lot of fun.
yeah. There is a certain level of just like satisfaction finally being able to play it back. It's all done.
hmm Yeah, actually, currently, like what I'm working on is doing basic animations for the characters. For the game.
Oh yeah, I guess the game would be like that feeling, but on a ridiculously extended level, seeing an entire game come together. Okay, so yeah,
Yeah,
walk cycle.
yeah. And it's a pretty simple walk cycle. I thought about making it a bit more complex, but then I was like, no, this is supposed to be not entirely a blank slate character, but still it's a protagonist. It's a playable character, so he shouldn't be way too exaggerated.
Yeah,
So yeah, just a little bit of a very simple walk
simple
cycle.
walk cycle. Oh, like for your
Yeah.
Blender renders, like for that Anubis piece, was that in cycles
Mhm.
or EV?
It wasn't cycles, yeah.
Okay.
It was a bit of a embarrassing thing. Yeah, but anyway, I bought a new PC very recently. It's a pretty powerful workstation. I was really happy with it after working on my old laptop for like half a year.
Yeah.
And I immediately started that Anubis piece and was like, oh my goodness, it renders in cycles so much faster than on my poor old laptop. It's like, and I'm like, it's 4 times faster. No, it's like it's 16 times faster than on my laptop. And my friend, who's like way more proficient than Blender, is like, you're saying like your like 4070 Ti renders in cycles 16 times faster than your laptop from 2015. I'm like, yeah, it's so much better. Like, please check what your cycles is using right now. Is it using GPU or CPU? And I was like, it is using CPU. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
So yeah, I obviously after that I've switched to GPU
yeah.
rendering, and it's not 16 times, it's not like 32 times, it's several hundred times faster.
Yeah. Oh my god. I did the same
At this
exact thing with my PC.
at
I
the
got a
same
new one.
time, why? I don't understand why the default function is rendering on your CPU. Why? But yeah, do go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, I was just saying did the exact same thing. Got a new PC with a RTX graphics card. I was like, yeah, that's supposed to be optimized. Like Blender's supposed to be optimized for that. It should be like ridiculously
Mm,
faster. And it's just like,
yep.
nope. It's like, man, this is like better, but it kind of still sucks. But yeah, the
Yep.
default render settings in Blender make no sense.
Make no sense at all.
They are just very
Well,
unoptimized.
that's that's a big thing that I noticed about Blender. Like, obviously, the cost to quality ratio is just incomparable to Maya because it's a free software. But at the same time, the difference between Maya and Blender is basically difference between Windows and Linux. It's probably the best analogy. Maya is way more expensive. It's ludicrously expensive if you're a freelancer. And it comes with every possible, plugin, every possible tool that you want. It's like it's bulky. It's very slow to load, but like it comes with just anything you would like, anything you can imagine using in your workflow. Whereas Blender is a core. It's basically just a core. You can find a million different plugins for every aspect um, of 3D art that you can think of. But at the same time, like basic functions are way more rudimentary than in Maya.
Yeah. No, there's definitely a lot of tutorials on Blender where it's like, okay, and then you just need to get this plugin that's $25, and it's like, well, like this free program's gonna get real expensive real quick at this rate.
Still nowhere near as expensive as Maya. But yeah, I think it was. I think I actually rage tweeted about it yesterday. One major pet peeve about people doing Blender tutorials on YouTube is the fact that pretty much all of them just like explain it in shortcuts. They basically go, and now you press N, and now you press like Shift R, and you press like I don't know, and then you go to flick menu and go like left, right, left. Thank you very much for explaining it. Now please explain where to find those functions properly, because like different people can use different setups for their hotkeys. Like I went into Blender and like the first thing Blender asked me, are you like industry professional and you need industry standard hotkeys, or are you gonna use default Blender hotkeys? And of course I went to for like industry standard,
Yeah.
which is completely different from default Blender hotkey shortcuts and hotkeys.
Yeah.
So like
So it's just useless
90% of
watching
those,
all these tutorials.
yep, 90% of those tutorials are basically useless. And it's like, oh, it's so frustrating.
Because that's like so much of why you watch the tutorials. Because it's just otherwise it's just ridiculously slow if you don't know the shortcuts. Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah. I probably at some point will have to relearn all the Blender shortcuts properly. I dread that moment. I know it's coming sooner or later. But yeah, that's where I'm at in my Blender learning process. Feeling very stiff, feeling very unsure. It's basically like, I don't know, like you've been riding bike your whole life and now you need to learn quad bike or something like that,
Like
which
unicycle.
kind of unicycle exactly like it's kind of feels like the process is more or less the same, but your skill set, your muscle memory is not there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's such a big thing about 3D is just being fluent in the software that you're
Mm-hmm.
working in.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it just takes an eternity to get anything done.
Yep, exactly.
Uh, Coming up here almost on the 2 hour mark. I think.
Oh goodness,
Yeah,
you're
we've been
right.
really cruising along.
Yeah, we've been talking for almost 2 hours. I mean, it was really fun and exciting to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on and explaining your process, explaining a lot of stuff on 3D. I kind of want to get Substance Designer now because
It's
oh my
fun.
goodness, that looks so fun.
I mean, it's a niche software, right? In a sense that like it's only good for procedural materials, for tile-level materials, but it's so much fun. Just like tweaking around those little nodes and getting an result that you can change in a matter of seconds. It's just so satisfying.
I'm not sure if we could replicate that in Blender because I know they have the geometry nodes. There might be some like way less efficient
Oh,
way to do it in in Blender, but oh
yeah, I mean, feels to me like yeah, there is a way. It's again not as robust as Substance Designer. Yeah, like Blender is a jack of all trades software where you can do a little bit of everything, but if you want to go into very specific area, yeah, you need to use plugins. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun talking about this stuff. Thank you for inviting me.
yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. I will have links to your Twitter and FA, or is there any other links you want me to put in the description?
Um, I think somewhere in the middle of our conversation, we were talking about tools by PNGX. Maybe it would be a good idea to post them in the description.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
since it's something people will probably be interested in trying for themselves. And probably like last thing that I want to mention in regards to that, those are free tools, but if you can, if you're gonna like, if people are gonna use those tools, I would highly advise to use the artist's coffee and tip just a little bit.
Yeah,
Like it's
absolutely.
free, but it's such a great tool that I would definitely financially stimulate, incentivize.
Yeah,
Oh, what's
support
the
it.
word I'm looking for? Yeah, essentially, yeah. Give a little bit of a financial thank you to a person who's doing that for free. It's just such a useful tool.
All right. Well, I'll have
All right. Well,
links to all that, and thanks again for coming on.
yeah. Thanks for inviting me again. It's been great.